On my daughter's 40th birthday, I stood quietly in the kitchen, frosting a lemon cake, the same recipe Catherine had adored as a child. As the scent of lemon and sugar filled the air, I smiled softly, imagining her face lighting up in delight. But when I presented the cake, Catherine didn't smile. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said coldly, "The best gift you could send me is to disappear from my life." That night, I sat alone at my dining table, the lemon cake untouched, and in that crushing silence, I made a decision that would change everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Dorothy Wilson, and I've always believed that love was measured in acts of service. For decades, I had poured myself into my daughter's happiness, staying up late to sew Halloween costumes, working extra shifts at the hospital to pay for dance lessons, and tucking away my own dreams so Catherine could chase hers. Widowed young when my husband Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack, I carried the weight of two parents on my small shoulders, never letting my daughter feel the crushing absence of a father. I still remember the night after Robert's funeral. Catherine was only 8, her small face confused and frightened as she asked when Daddy was coming home. I held her close, my own grief pushed aside, and promised that I would always be there for her. "You'll never be alone, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Mom will always take care of you." And I did. I worked double shifts as a nurse, saved every penny, helped with homework late into the night, even when my eyes burned with exhaustion. I cheered at every dance recital, bandaged every scraped knee, and celebrated every achievement as if it were the Olympic gold. When Catherine needed braces, I sold my grandmother's silver to pay for them. When she wanted to attend a summer camp that cost more than a month's salary, I picked up weekend work at a retirement home. "You're too soft on that girl," my sister Marge would say. "She needs to learn the value of things." But I couldn't bear to see disappointment on Catherine's face. Not when I could prevent it. Not when I had promised Robert I would give her everything. Now at 62, I stood in my own kitchen, the one I had bought with my life savings, spreading frosting over a lemon cake. My hands moved carefully, fingers stiff from arthritis, but still steady. "This will make her smile," I whispered to myself. She used to love this cake. By the time the sun reached its peak, the house smelled of warm sugar and zest. I changed into my nicest blouse, a soft blue one that Robert once said matched my eyes, brushed my silver hair, and set the table for lunch. I even arranged fresh daisies in a vase, Catherine's favorite flowers since she was a little girl picking them in our backyard. The front door creaked open around noon. My heart leapt as Catherine strode in, trailed by her husband, James, and their 2 children, Emma and Noah. "Surprise," I said brightly. "I made you something special." Catherine froze in the doorway, her expression unreadable. James looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The children barely glanced at me as they shuffled past, eyes glued to their phones. "Mom," Catherine began, her tone sharp. "What is all this?" "I baked your favorite lemon cake," I said, my smile faltering. "I thought we could have lunch together, just like old times." There was a heavy silence. "Honestly, Mom," Catherine said, her voice rising, "you don't get it, do you? I don't need cakes or lunches. The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life." The words struck like a knife. My throat tightened as my world tilted around me. I I don't understand," I whispered. "You never do," Catherine snapped. "You're always hovering, always meddling. I'm tired of it." James shifted awkwardly but said nothing. The children stared at their phones, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. I felt my hands tremble as I smoothed my blouse. "I only wanted to celebrate you." "Well, don't," Catherine said coldly. "We're leaving." Before I could respond, they were gone, the door slamming behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. I sank into a chair, staring at the untouched cake, its yellow frosting suddenly garish in the afternoon light. That night, I sat alone at the dining table. I tried to eat a slice of the lemon cake, but found I couldn't swallow past the lump in my throat. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. The clock Robert had hung when we first moved in, promising we would fill this house with laughter and children. I thought about all the ways I had been shrinking myself over the years, giving up my bedroom so Catherine and James could have it when they stayed over, letting them repaint the living room in colors I hated, allowing them to borrow my savings to buy a second car. It was as if I had ceased to exist in my own home. When had this happened? When had I become a ghost in my own life in the days that followed? Catherine didn't call. I began noticing other small things I had overlooked before. My favorite armchair, the one Robert gave me for our 10th anniversary, had been moved to the garage months ago when Catherine said it clashed with the aesthetic. My mail was opened without my consent. Bills and personal letters alike spread across the kitchen counter. My bank statements showed withdrawals I hadn't made. I checked my online banking, something Robert had insisted I learn before he passed, and discovered Catherine had accessed my account regularly, taking small amounts that added up to thousands over the past year, money I had been saving for emergency medical expenses, given how expensive healthcare had become. The final straw came when I overheard Catherine talking to a friend on the phone while she thought I was napping. "She should just sign the house over to us," Catherine said, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "She's too old to manage it anyway. Did you know she forgot to pay the water bill last month? We had to handle it. It's exhausting." I hadn't forgotten the bill. Catherine had taken it from my mail pile, saying she would help with my finances. My heart hardened. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a life that wasn't centered around Catherine's happiness. A life where I wasn't constantly apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for existing. That evening, I opened a blank journal I had received as a Christmas gift years ago but never used. On the first page, I wrote, "I have been invisible in my own home, but not anymore." I made a list of everything Catherine and her family had taken: money, space, respect, and resolved to take back what was mine. The next morning, I visited a lawyer. The offices of Martinez Legal Services were in a small building downtown, modest but well kept. Sarah Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, listened carefully as I explained my situation. "I want to update my will and freeze access to my accounts," I said firmly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Ms. Martinez nodded, taking notes. "What about your house? You mentioned that your daughter and her family have been staying with you." "They haven't been staying with me," I clarified. "They've been taking over. I want to reclaim full control." Ms. Martinez smiled, a small, approving curve of her lips. "You're doing the right thing. Mrs. Wilson, many women in your position struggle to set boundaries with adult children. Let's start with a financial power of attorney, revocation, and move from there." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't recognize my own house anymore. The walls were no longer the soft cream Robert and I had chosen 30 years ago when we first moved to Fairview. They were now a harsh gray Catherine had insisted on repainting to modernize the place. The warm floral curtains I'd sewn myself had been replaced with sterile white blinds. Even my kitchen, once the heart of my home, felt alien. My favorite tea mugs had vanished, replaced with trendy glass cups Catherine brought in. I had surrendered each small battle, thinking it would keep the peace. But now I realized I had been slowly erased, painted over like the walls, until nothing of me remained in this house. After my meeting with the lawyer, I walked back home with heavy steps. The air was crisp, and the sun cast long shadows over the quiet suburban streets of Fairview. I remembered when Robert and I had first moved here, young and full of dreams. Back then, the house felt alive with laughter and love. Now it felt like a cage. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hollow silence. "Catherine," I called out instinctively. Though I knew they wouldn't be home, Catherine and her family had gone to the beach for the weekend. I had found out only because I overheard James talking on the phone the night before. They hadn't even bothered to tell me they'd be gone. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Well, not my bed anymore. I now slept in the small guest room because Catherine and James insisted on using the master bedroom while they saved up for a house of their own. They had been saving up for 5 years now. I stared at the faded photo of Robert on my nightstand. He was smiling, his arm around my waist, standing in front of our newly purchased home. "Robert," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What happened to us, to our home?" That evening, I began sorting through old documents, bank statements, property deeds, utility bills. My hands trembled as I discovered more unauthorized withdrawals, thousands of dollars siphoned from my account over the past year. "Catherine," I whispered, my chest tightening. "How could you?" The next morning, I confronted my daughter. "Catherine, can we talk?" I said as she breezed into the kitchen, shopping bags in hand. "Not now. Mom, I'm busy." "It's important." Catherine sighed dramatically. "Fine, what is it?" I gripped the edge of the counter. "I saw my bank statement as there are withdrawals I didn't make. Thousands of dollars." "Catherine, did you take it?" Catherine rolled her eyes. "We needed the money, the kids' school fees, the car repairs. You wouldn't understand. You didn't even ask me." My voice cracked. "You're overreacting," Catherine snapped. "You have more than enough. Why are you being so selfish?" "Selfish," I whispered. "Yes, you're old. Mom, you don't need all this space, all this money. It's time you start thinking about us." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The word old hung in the air between us, wielded like a weapon. Was that all I was to her now? An old woman who should quietly disappear that night? I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Catherine's words echoed in my mind. "You're old. You don't need all this. It's time you start thinking about us." But hadn't I spent my whole life thinking about Catherine, every decision, every sacrifice, every dream deferred? Wasn't it all for her? When had it become my duty to disappear? I thought about Robert, about what he would say if he could see us now. He had always been the strong one, the one who could stand firm when I wavered. "Dot," he would say, using his nickname for me. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm." A steely resolve settled in my chest. The following week, I returned to Miss Martinez and signed the papers to freeze my accounts. I also initiated proceedings to reclaim full control of my house, including a formal notice stating to Catherine and her family to find their own housing within 60 days. "It won't be easy," Ms. Martinez warned. "They'll push back. Family dynamics can get ugly in these situations." "I'm ready," I said firmly. For the first time in years, I felt awake. When Catherine discovered the frozen accounts, she stormed into my room, face flushed with anger. "What did you do?" she screamed. "I took back what's mine." I replied quietly, "You're insane. Do you want me and the kids out on the street?" I stood my ground. "You'll have to find your own way," Catherine thumped. "This is my home, my life, and I won't let you take any more of it." Catherine's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said softly, "but at least I'll have my dignity." The house was no longer silent. After I froze my accounts and began legal proceedings to regain control of my property, Catherine turned the household into a war zone. The laughter of my grandchildren, once a source of, now felt like weapons thrown into the air. Doors slammed at all hours, voices were raised, and even the family dog seemed on edge, cowering under tables. I sat alone in the small guest room that had become my sanctuary. I clutched my journal to my chest and whispered into the quiet, "I won't let them take everything." 2 weeks earlier, when I filed the papers, I expected resistance, but I didn't expect this. Catherine refused to leave, claiming rights to the home she had grown up in. "This is my home, too," she screamed when I presented the legal documents. "You've lost your mind." "Mom." "No," I said calmly. "I found it." James tried to mediate, but his words fell flat. He'd grown comfortable living under my roof. No rent, no real responsibility. Just the occasional complaint about the Wi-Fi speed or the water pressure. You're tearing the family apart, he said accusingly. I think that's already happened, I replied quietly. In the following days, Catherine began twisting the narrative. She called relatives, painting herself as a victim. She's throwing us out on the street. Catherine sobbed into the phone. After everything we've done for her. Soon, my phone rang nonstop. Cousins, church friends, even distant neighbors called to scold me. How could you do this to your own daughter? You'll die alone, Dorothy. Don't you care about your grandchildren? Each call felt like a knife, but I refused to waver. I spoke to Marge, expecting the same judgment, but she surprised me. It's about time, she said gruffly. That girl has been walking all over you for years. Robert would be proud you're finally standing up for yourself. Every night I sat at my small wooden desk, writing in my journal. I've sacrificed my peace for theirs too long. I won't go back. I reread old entries, tiny snapshots of a life spent shrinking to make room for others. The time Catherine borrowed my car and wrecked it without apology. The day James changed the Wi-Fi password, locking me out of my own network. The countless nights I sat alone while Catherine's family filled my house with guests, never inviting me to join them. The eviction process dragged on for weeks. I began making small changes, reclaiming my favorite armchair from the garage, replacing the blinds in the kitchen with my old floral curtains. I even bought myself a bouquet of daisies, the first flowers I'd bought for myself in years. It felt like breathing again. One evening, I stood in my kitchen boiling water for tea when Catherine stormed in. This ends now, she hissed. You're going to call your lawyer and tell them to stop. No. Catherine's eyes narrowed. If you don't, you'll never see me or the kids again. My hands trembled as I placed the tea bag in my cup. I hope it doesn't come to that, I said softly. But I'm prepared if it does. Catherine stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. You've changed, she spat. You used to care about family. I still do, I replied. But now I care about myself, too. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair, sipping tea. The familiar contours of the chair embraced me, and I ran my fingers over the worn armrests where Robert used to rest his hands. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. The next morning, James came to my room. Dorothy, wow, he said gently. Can we talk? I looked up, wary. We're leaving, he said. We found a place to stay temporarily. Catherine is upset, but I think it's for the best. I nodded, my heart heavy and light all at once. As James walked away, he paused. I'm sorry for how things turned out. So am I, Akbar, I whispered. The house was silent again, for the first time in years. I could walk from room to room without hearing footsteps thundering upstairs, without toys scattered across the hallway, without voices calling my name, not in anger, not in need, just silence. I stood in the middle of my living room and realized this silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. The morning after Catherine and her family left, I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. It still smelled faintly of her expensive perfume, the kind that cost more than my monthly prescription medications. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled in a rush to leave. Clothes hangers lay scattered on the floor, and drawers hung open like wounds. I walked to the window and opened it wide. Fresh air filled the room, carrying with it the scent of the rose bushes Robert had planted below. For the first time in years, it felt like mine again. Downstairs, boxes were piled near the front door, items Catherine's family had left behind in their hasty departure. I sifted through them slowly, methodically. Designer clothes Catherine hadn't bothered to pack, toys the children had outgrown, James's golf clubs, oddly had been left leaning against the wall. I found an old family photo at the bottom of one box. Myself, Robert, and a teenage Catherine grinning at a beach picnic. My chest tightened as I traced their faces with my finger. Catherine's smile had been so genuine then. her eyes bright with that peculiar teenage mix of confidence and uncertainty. Robert's arm was around my shoulders, his face tanned and relaxed. "Where did we lose each other?" I whispered to the empty room. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a strange new rhythm. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away years of grime and clutter. I rearranged furniture, moving pieces back to where they had been before Catherine's improvements. I filled vases with fresh flowers, baked bread for myself, and played the old jazz records that Robert and I had collected. But the nights were the hardest. I'd sit in my armchair with a book on my lap, reading the same sentence over and over, unable to concentrate. The house didn't echo with laughter anymore, but with memories, both sweet and bitter. I would catch myself listening for Noah's footsteps or Emma's giggles, only to be met with silence. One evening, nearly a month after they left, my phone rang. My heart leapt when I saw Catherine's name. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, and I missed her. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," Catherine said flatly, "we need money." My momentary hope collapsed. "I can't, Catherine," I said softly. "I've helped enough." "You're unbelievable," she snapped. "You're abandoning your family." "No," I said firmly. "I'm saving myself." "Then you'll never see me or the kids again," Catherine hissed before hanging up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart pounding. Was this truly the end? Would I never again hold Emma and Noah, never see them grow up? The thought was almost unbearable, but something had shifted in me. I would no longer be held hostage by threats and emotional manipulation. The next day, a letter arrived in the mail. It wasn't from Catherine, it was shown. It was from Mrs. Langley, the elderly neighbor 2 houses down. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting more judgment, more accusations. Instead, I read, "Dear Dorothy, I don't know if you remember, but I've lived across from you for 25 years. I've watched from my window as you carried burdens no one should bear alone. I saw how hard you worked to raise Catherine, how you welcomed her family into your home, and how they took over. I never said anything because I didn't want to interfere by my own. But I want you to know this. I see you, Banero. I've always seen you, and I think you are braver than you realize. With love, Margaret Langley." I clutched the letter to my chest as tears spilled down my cheeks. For so long, I had felt invisible, even to myself. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't. Someone had been witnessing my life all along, seeing my struggles, my sacrifices, and now my courage. That evening, I lit a candle in the living room and sat down with my journal. I thought losing Catherine would break me. I wrote, "But maybe it's teaching me how to live again." The days grew longer, and so did my sense of solitude. Each morning I walked through my quiet house, running my fingers along the smooth wooden banister Robert once built. The rooms felt larger now, emptier, but also lighter, as though years of tension had been lifted from the walls. For the first time in decades, I could breathe. I began exploring corners of my own life I had long abandoned. In the attic, I found old sketchbooks from my 20s. Before motherhood consumed every moment, I had wanted to be an artist once, had even taken classes at the community college. Robert had encouraged my drawing, framing my amateur sketches and hanging them proudly. Sitting by the window, I began sketching again, delicate flowers, quiet landscapes, and sometimes faces I could never quite finish. At first, my hands shook, my lines hesitant, but soon the movements felt natural, like reconnecting with an old friend. I enrolled in an art class at the local community center, a small room with large windows and the perpetual smell of erasers and coffee. "I haven't done this in years," I admitted shyly to the instructor, a cheerful woman named Claire with colorful glasses and paint-spattered jeans. "Well, it's never too late to start," Claire said warmly, patting my shoulder. "Art doesn't care how old you are." Each Thursday, I sat among strangers who gradually became acquaintances, and then, surprisingly, friends. At first, I barely spoke, but slowly my voice returned. Soft, careful words at first, then laughter I hadn't heard in my own throat in years. "I feel silly drawing at my age," I confessed one afternoon. looking at my charcoal-smudged fingers. "Nonsense," said an older man across the table, his white beard dusted with pastels. "You're not silly. You're free." Free. The words settled in my chest like a warm stone. At home, I found myself humming again as I cooked dinner for one. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, bought a new set of curtains, and filled the walls with my own drawings. It wasn't a house anymore. It was mine. But Catherine's voice still echoed in my mind at night. "You're abandoning your family, you'll die alone." The words wrapped around me like a cold fog, creeping in as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. 3 months passed without a word from her. I called on Emma's birthday, but my call went straight to voicemail. I sent cards for both children, but never knew if they received them. I left messages that were never returned. One rainy evening in April, my phone rang. I hesitated when I saw Catherine's name. With a deep breath, I answered. "Mom," Catherine's voice cracked. "We're struggling. The kids miss you." My heart ached. "I miss them, too," I said softly. I, I shouldn't have said those things before. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. I waited, listening to her breathing on the other end. "Can we come back?" Catherine asked. "Just until we get back on our feet." I closed my eyes. I could hear the desperation in her daughter's voice, but I also heard the warning in my own heart. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about necessity. "I'm sorry, Catherine," I whispered, "but I can't let things go back to how they were. You need to build your own life now." There was silence on the other end. Then Catherine hung up. I sat quietly, tears streaming down my cheeks. But this time, my tears weren't just sorrow. They were release. The next day, I walked to the community garden near my house and knelt in the soil. I planted lavender and rosemary, letting my fingers sink into the earth. It felt like planting pieces of myself, parts I was only now rediscovering. Spring came quietly, painting Fairview in soft greens and blooms of color. Dorothy Wilson stood at her kitchen window, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The garden outside was alive with lavender, rosemary, and daisies, all planted by her own hands. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged to myself. It had been 3 months since Catherine's last call. I thought about her often, not with anger, but with a tender ache in my chest. I hoped she was finding her own strength too, but I didn't regret my decision. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to fit into someone else's story. I was writing my own. One bright afternoon, I walked to the community center for my art class. I carried a small portfolio under my arm. My latest sketches, which Claire had encouraged me to display in the upcoming spring showcase. "Are you nervous?" Claire asked with a smile. "A little, Tom," I admitted, "but also proud." "You should be." At the art showcase, I stood by my drawings, delicate sketches of flowers, hands, and faces full of emotion. "Did you make these?" a young woman asked, stopping in front of a drawing of an elderly woman's hands, each wrinkle meticulously rendered. "Yes," I said softly. "They're beautiful," she said, meeting my eyes. "You can feel the life in them." I smiled. "Thank you." For years, I had been invisible, but here in this small community hall, strangers saw me, not as a caretaker, not as a burden, but as a woman with a voice and vision of her own. After the showcase, Claire invited the class for coffee at a nearby cafe. I hesitated. I rarely went out in the evenings anymore, but something pushed me to accept. Sitting around a table with these people who knew nothing of my past but accepted my present was strangely liberating. To Dorothy, Claire raised her mug, our newest exhibiting artist. Everyone clinked their cups, and warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. Later that week, I received another letter from Mrs. Langley. "Dorothy, I walked past your garden today. It's beautiful, just like you. I hope you know how many women like us are watching you and finding courage in your story. You remind us it's never too late to reclaim our lives." with admiration. Margaret, I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. That evening, I sat in my favorite armchair, the soft light of the setting sun streaming through the window. I picked up my journal and began to write. For so long, I thought my worth came from what I gave others, my time, my money, my love. But now I see that I was always enough. Not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as Dorothy. I'm not disappearing. I'm finally here. I closed the journal, my heart full and light. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find two young girls from the neighborhood holding a basket of muffins. Hi, Mrs. Wilson, one chirped. Mom says these are for you. She says your garden inspires her. I knelt to their level, smiling. Tell your mom I said thank you, I replied warmly. The girls waved and ran off, their laughter echoing down the street. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the breeze brushing my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. A week later, I was in my garden, pruning roses, when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. My heart stuttered as Catherine stepped out. She looked thinner, her face drawn and tired. She approached cautiously, stopping at the edge of the garden. Mom, hey, she said, her voice small. I straightened, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. Catherine, your garden looks nice. It was such an ordinary observation, so unlike the cutting remarks I'd grown accustomed to. I nodded. Thank you. We stood in awkward silence, years of hurt stretching between us. I'm sorry, Tva, Catherine finally said, the words rushing out. I've been horrible to you. The things I said, the way I treated you. I have no excuse. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. What changed? Catherine looked down. We've been struggling. James lost his job, and I realized how much we took from you, how much I took. She paused. And then I saw your drawing at the community center. My drawing, the one of hands. They were your hands, weren't they? I recognized them. They looked so strong, even with the arthritis. I remembered how those hands used to braid my hair, make me soup when I was sick. Tears filled her eyes. I've been so selfish. I wanted to rush to her, to embrace her as I always had, but something held me back. Catherine, I'll always love you, but I can't go back to how things were. I know, she whispered. I'm not asking for that. I miss my mom. The simple honesty of those words broke something open in me. I've missed you too. Could we maybe have tea sometime? She asked tentatively. Just to talk. It was a small request, a tiny bridge across the chasm between us. I'd like that, I said. As Catherine turned to go, she hesitated. The kids ask about you. They'd like to see you. I'd like that too, I said, feeling the first tender shoots of hope. After she left, I sat on the garden bench, emotions swirling. Was this a genuine change of heart, or just another manipulation? Only time would tell. But for once, I wasn't rushing to sacrifice myself at the first sign of reconciliation. I would move forward cautiously, protecting the self I had worked so hard to reclaim. The following Sunday, Catherine brought Emma and Noah for lunch. The children were shy at first, as though meeting a stranger, but when I brought out a plate of freshly baked cookies, the ice began to melt. Grandma, did you really make these? Noah asked, chocolate smeared on his chin. I did. I smiled. Would you like to help me make the next batch? His eager nod warmed my heart. Emma, now 12 and on the cusp of adolescence, was more reserved. She sat quietly, observing, until she noticed the sketchbook on the side table. You draw, she asked, surprise in her voice. I do. Would you like to see? She nodded, and I handed her the book. As she flipped it through the pages, her eyes widened. These are really good, Grandma. Thank you, Emma. Could you teach me sometime? I'd love to, I said, meeting Catherine's eyes over Emma's head. Something passed between us, a recognition, perhaps of cycles broken and new possibilities. After they left, I added a note to my journal. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means building something new from the ruins of what was broken. The next day, Miss Martinez called with news. The house is officially secured in your name only, Mrs. Wilson. I've also set up the trust fund as you requested. Your savings are protected for your healthcare needs, with provisions for your grandchildren's education. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift. What about the amendment to my will? All done. Catherine will inherit the house eventually, but the terms are clear. She cannot sell it during your lifetime. Even with your permission, your residence is protected. It wasn't about punishing Catherine. It was about ensuring I would never again be pushed out of my own life. That evening, I started a small painting. Not just a sketch this time, but a full watercolor. It showed a garden in bloom, with a small silver-haired figure tending to the plants. Behind her, barely visible but unmistakably there, were two children and a younger woman, watching from a respectful distance. I titled it Boundaries in Bloom and hung it in the hallway. Summer arrived with gentle heat and longer days. My garden flourished, and so did I. I joined a senior swimming class at the local pool, rediscovering the joy of moving my body through water. I invited Mrs. Langley for tea regularly, forming a friendship that should have begun years ago. Catherine and I established a careful routine: Sunday lunches, occasional shopping trips. She remained in the apartment she and James had rented, working to rebuild their finances and, I hoped, their independence. Our relationship was different now, more cautious, more equal. I was no longer just her mother. I was Dorothy Wilson, a woman in her own right. One afternoon, Emma asked if she could stay with me for a weekend art workshop. Catherine hesitated, then looked at me. If Grandma doesn't mind, I'd love to have her, Alda, I said, recognizing the trust being offered. That weekend, Emma and I painted side by side in the sunroom. I taught her about brushstrokes and color mixing, about patience and perspective, but the most important lesson was unspoken, that it's never too late to find your voice. Grandma, Emma said as we cleaned our brushes, Mom told me she was mean to you before. I paused, unsure how to respond. She said she forgot that you're a person too, not just a mom. Emma looked up at me with serious eyes. I think your paintings are really good. I'm glad you didn't disappear. I hugged her close, tears threatening. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. James found a new job in September, and Catherine started part-time work at a local bookstore. They were rebuilding their life, step by step. I watched from a distance, offering support but not solutions. It was their journey now. One evening, Catherine called just to chat, not to ask for anything, not to complain, but simply to share her day. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. I'm taking a financial management class, she said. I should have done it years ago. That's wonderful, I replied, hearing the pride in her voice. I want to thank you, Mom, she said softly, for not giving in, for making me grow up. Finally, the words settled in my heart like seeds. I'm proud of you, Catherine, I said, and meant it. In October, Claire encouraged me to submit my work to a small gallery showing local artists. To my astonishment, 3 of my pieces were accepted. The opening night arrived, and I stood nervously in a black dress I'd bought specially for the occasion. You look beautiful, Mrs. Langley said, squeezing my arm. Robert would be so proud. I smiled, thinking of him. Yes, I think he would. The gallery was crowded with strangers admiring various artworks. My small corner displayed 3 watercolors, one of my garden, one of the neighborhood park, and one of an empty armchair bathed in sunlight. Mom, I turned to see Catherine, James, and the children, all dressed up and smiling. We wouldn't miss it, Catherine said, handing me a small gift bag. This is for you. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a small palette with paintbrushes. To celebrate your new beginning, Catherine said, "and to thank you for showing me it's possible." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, words failing me. Instead, I hugged her close, feeling something heal between us. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the house quiet around me. I opened my journal and wrote, "Today." I was an artist, not a mother, not a grandmother, not a widow, though I am all those things too. But today, primarily, I was Dorothy Wilson, artist, and my family saw me. The following week, and I received an unexpected call. A woman who had seen my work at the gallery wanted to commission a painting for her office. It wasn't a large commission, but it was my first. "Of course," I said, trying to sound professional while my heart soared. "I'd be delighted." After hanging up, I danced around my kitchen, laughing like a girl, 62 years old, and I was beginning a career I'd abandoned 4 decades ago. Life settled into a new pattern. Art classes, garden work, swimming, occasional visits with Catherine and her family. I joined a book club at the library and made new friends. Women my age with stories of their own. We shared wine and laughter, comparing notes on life's second acts. I never thought I'd be starting over at 62. I confessed one evening, "You're not starting over," my friend Elaine said wisely. "You're continuing from where you left off. There's a difference." I thought about that often in the quiet moments. I wasn't a new person. I was finally allowing my true self to emerge from years of self-sacrifice and invisibility. 1 year after Catherine and her family moved out, I hosted a garden party. Friends from art class, neighbors, my book club, and yes, Catherine and her family, all gathered in the backyard I had transformed into a riot of color and fragrance. Mrs. Langley raised her glass in a toast. "To Dorothy, who reminds us all that life can bloom at any age." I looked around at these people who saw me, truly saw me, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The journey hadn't been easy, and the wounds weren't fully healed. But I had reclaimed myself. I hadn't disappeared. I had finally appeared. 18 months after Catherine told me to disappear from her life, I found myself standing before an easel in my sunroom, early morning light streaming through the windows. My arthritis was acting up that day, making my fingers stiff and slightly swollen, but I kept painting. The discomfort was a small price to pay for the joy that flooded through me with each brushstroke. The canvas before me held the beginnings of a portrait. Mrs. Langley sitting in her garden, her weathered face turned toward the sun. I had started taking portrait classes 6 months ago, challenging myself to capture not just likeness, but essence. Mrs. Langley had been my first willing subject outside of class. "You're making me look younger than I am," she had teased during our last sitting. "I'm painting what I see," I'd replied truthfully. What I saw was beauty in her 82 years, dignity in the lines around her eyes, wisdom in the set of her mouth, strength in her gnarled hands that still tended roses despite arthritis worse than my own. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a cloth and answered. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Diane from Fairview Community College. We received your application to teach the Senior Beginners Art Workshop." My heart quickened. After 3 successful small exhibitions, I had finally gathered the courage to apply for a teaching position. Not for the money, my pension and savings were sufficient, but for the chance to help others discover what I had, that creativity doesn't expire with age. "We'd like to offer you the position for the summer session," Diane continued. 10 weeks, Tuesday mornings. Would you be interested?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd be delighted." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Teacher. It was a title I'd never imagined for myself. Mother, wife, widow, nurse. These had been my identities. But now, at 64, I was adding new ones: artist, teacher, woman rediscovered. I called Marge to share the news. "Not surprised," my sister said in her characteristically blunt manner. "You always were the patient one. Remember how you taught me to French braid my hair when Mom couldn't be bothered?" I laughed. "That was 50 years ago. And you haven't lost the knack for explaining things. Those seniors will be lucky to have you. After our call, I returned to my painting with renewed energy. As I worked, I thought about the journey of the past year and a half. The pain had not disappeared entirely. There were still moments when Catherine's words echoed in my mind, still days when I missed what our relationship could have been. But those moments no longer defined me. Our relationship had settled into something new, not the close bond I had once imagined, but not the toxic dynamic it had become either. Catherine and James had moved to a modest house across town last summer, using their own savings for the down payment. They visited once or twice a month, usually with the children. Our interactions were polite, sometimes warm, occasionally strained, but always respectful. Emma, now 13, had developed a genuine interest in art. She spent one Saturday a month with me, learning techniques and developing her own style. Those days were precious to me, not just for the connection with my granddaughter, but for the marvel of watching her discover her own creative voice. Noah, at 9, was less interested in art, but loved helping in the garden. He had his own small plot where he grew carrots and radishes with fierce determination. "Grandma's garden apprentice," he called himself proudly. When my painting session ended, I cleaned my brushes with care, a ritual that always brought me peace. My phone chimed with a text from Claire. "Don't forget dinner tonight." Big news to share, Claire had become one of my closest friends, our bond forged through art and mutual respect. She was hosting a small dinner party for a few members of our art group. I texted back a quick confirmation and headed to shower. As I dressed for the evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had stood in this same spot 2 years ago, frosting a lemon cake with trembling hands. My silver hair was now cut in a stylish bob that framed my face. I had lost weight, not from stress or neglect as before, but from swimming and garden work. There was color in my cheeks and a steadiness in my gaze that had long been absent. "Hello, Dorothy," I said softly to my reflection, a habit I had developed as part of my healing. A simple acknowledgement of my presence, my worth. The evening at Claire's was lively. 6 of us gathered around her dining table, sharing food, wine, and stories. Claire's big news turned out to be thrilling. She had been offered a position as artist in residence at a retreat center in New Mexico for 3 months. "I'm terrified and excited," she admitted. "I've never lived anywhere but Fairview." "You'll be amazing," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "I have a favor to ask," Claire said. "Would you take over my advanced class while I'm gone? You're more than qualified." The table fell silent as everyone looked at me. A year ago, I would have demurred, made myself small, insisted I wasn't ready. But the Dorothy of today recognized opportunity when it knocked. "I'd be honored," I said, raising my glass, "to new adventures." As we toasted, I felt a wave of gratitude for these people who had entered my life when I needed them most, for the community I had built from the ground up. On my drive home, I took the long route through Fairview, past the park where Robert and I used to walk on Sunday afternoons, past the school where Catherine had performed in plays and concerts. The town held layers of memories, some painful, some precious. But it was no longer just the backdrop to my family's story. It had become the setting for my own. When I arrived home, there was a package on my porch. No return address, just my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a small, exquisitely crafted wooden box. When I opened it, I found a collection of high-quality paintbrushes and a note. "For the woman who taught me it's never too late to hold the brushes again. Your work inspires me." A fellow late bloomer, I ran my fingers over the brushes, touched by the anonymous gift. Was it someone from my class? A visitor to one of my exhibitions? It didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the recognition of shared experience. The next morning, I used one of the new brushes to complete Mrs. Langley's portrait. The fine sable tip allowed for details I had struggled to capture with my older brushes. When I finally stepped back to assess the finished work, I felt a surge of pride. It was good, not just good for an amateur or good for my age, but genuinely good. I carefully wrapped the painting and drove to Mrs. Langley's house. She opened the door with her usual warm smile, which widened when she saw what I was carrying. "Is that for me?" she asked, eyes twinkling. "If you like it," I replied, suddenly nervous as I unwrapped it. Mrs. Langley fell silent as she studied the portrait. In it, she sat in her garden chair, face tilted toward the sun, a book forgotten in her lap. I had captured the moment I most associated with her. Peaceful contemplation, quiet strength. "Dorothy," she finally whispered, "you've seen right through to my soul." I blinked back tears. "You were my first champion," I said simply. "This is my thank you." We hung the portrait in her living room, then shared tea and cookies, as we had done countless times before. Our conversation meandered through topics: her granddaughter's college graduation, my upcoming teaching position, the new bakery in town. "I saw Catherine at the grocery store yesterday," Mrs. Langley mentioned casually. "She asked about you." "Oh," I kept my tone neutral. "She wanted to know if I thought you'd be interested in joining them for a weekend at the lake. Apparently James's company has a cabin they can use." I stirred my tea thoughtfully. Catherine hadn't mentioned this to me directly. Was she testing the waters through Mrs. Langley? "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That I'm not in the business of speaking for Dorothy Wilson anymore. That she should ask you herself." Mrs. Langley gave me a knowing look. "You've come too far to go backward, dear." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I might go, if she asks, but on my terms." Exactly right. That evening, Catherine called. She sounded tentative, almost shy, as she explained about the lake cabin and extended the invitation for the following weekend. "Emma's bringing her art supplies," she added. "She said maybe you could teach her some landscape techniques." I considered the invitation carefully. A weekend away with Catherine's family would have once been filled with tension, with me accommodating their every preference while silencing my own needs. But things were different now. "Thank you for the invitation," I said. "I'd be happy to join you, but I'll drive myself so I can come and go as I need to." There was a pause, and I wondered if the old Catherine would resurface, annoyed at my boundary. But instead she simply said, "That makes sense. We'll be happy to have you for however long works for you." Progress, I thought as we said goodbye, small steps forward. The lake cabin turned out to be a charming rustic retreat on the shores of Lake Morrison, about an hour from Fairview. I arrived Saturday morning, my car packed with art supplies for Emma and a homemade blueberry pie that was Noah's favorite. Catherine greeted me with a genuine hug, still somewhat awkward, but warm. "We're glad you came, Mom." James waved from the dock, where he was teaching Noah to fish. Emma emerged from the cabin, already clutching her sketchbook. "Grandma, can we go draw the lake now?" I laughed. "Let me at least bring my bags in first." The day unfolded pleasantly. Emma and I found a perfect spot on a rocky outcropping where we could see the entire sweep of the lake. I showed her how to capture the play of light on water, the perspective of mountains receding into the distance. "You're so good at this," Emma said, watching me work. "Why didn't you start painting sooner?" The question caught me off guard with its innocent directness. "I did, actually, when I was young, but then life got busy. I had your mom and worked as a nurse, and there just didn't seem to be time." Emma considered this. "But there's always time for the things that matter, right? That's what you told me." I smiled at having my own wisdom reflected back to me. "You're right. I should have made time, but I'm making up for it now." "I'm glad," Emma said, returning to her sketch. "You seem happier when you were painting." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought, dinner that night was a communal affair, with James grilling fish they'd caught and Catherine preparing a salad. I noticed small changes in their dynamic. The way James thanked Catherine for her help, the absence of the snippy comments that had once characterized their interactions. "This is delicious," I said, savoring the fresh trout. "James has been taking cooking classes," Catherine said with a hint of pride. "He makes dinner 3 nights a week now." "It's my therapy," James admitted. "Cheaper than a shrink." We all laughed, and I caught Catherine's eye across the table. There was an understanding there, a mutual recognition of how far we'd all come. After the children went to bed, the three of us sat on the porch, watching stars emerge over the lake. The silence was comfortable, punctuated only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "Mom," Catherine said finally, "I've been wanting to tell you something." I turned to her, heart quickening slightly. "I'm seeing a therapist," she said. "Have been for about 6 months now." "That's good," I said carefully, unsure where this was leading. "She's helping me understand some things about myself, about why I treated you the way I did." Catherine took a deep breath. "I was scared of ending up alone, of James leaving like Dad did." "Your father didn't leave," I interrupted gently. "He died, Catherine." "I know, but the result was the same. You were alone, struggling. I watched you sacrifice everything for me, and I think I resented you for it, for making me feel like I had to be worth all that sacrifice." I sat with her words, feeling their truth settle over me. How had I never seen this in trying to protect Catherine from feeling her father's absence? Had I inadvertently burdened her? And then when I had my own family, Catherine continued, "I think I was trying to take back everything I felt you had taken from me, my independence, my choices. I took your house, your money, your dignity, and I justified it by telling myself you owed me." James reached over and took her hand, supporting her through this difficult confession. "I'm not telling you this to make excuses," Catherine said, wiping away tears. "Nothing excuses how I treated you. I'm telling you because I want you to know I'm working on it, on myself, and because I'm sorry. Mom, truly sorry." I felt tears on my own cheeks. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "It helps me understand, too." We sat in silence again, but it was a healing silence, full of unspoken forgiveness. The next morning, I woke early and slipped out to the dock with my sketchbook. The lake was still, reflecting the pink gold dawn like a mirror. I began to draw, losing myself in the peaceful scene. "That's beautiful." I turned to see James standing behind me, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He offered one to me and sat down at a respectful distance. "Catherine's still sleeping," he said. "She was up late, worried she'd said too much or not enough." I nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. It was enough, more than I expected, honestly. James stared out at the lake. "I failed you too," he said quietly. "I saw how she was treating you, and I did nothing. Worse than nothing, I participated." "Why?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. He sighed. "Weakness, I guess. Fear of rocking the boat. And maybe some entitlement too. It was easier to take what you offered than to stand on our own feet." He met my eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Dorothy." "Thank you," I said simply. We sat in companionable silence, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water. "You know," James said eventually, "you've changed how I think about growing older. Before, I saw it as just decline, something to fear, but you're more alive now than when we first met. It's like you're expanding instead of contracting." I considered his words. "That's exactly how it feels." I agreed, fun, like I'm finally taking up the space I deserve. The weekend ended with promises to do it again, perhaps in the fall when the leaves would turn the lake shores to gold and crimson. I drove home with a heart lighter than it had been in years. Not because all wounds were healed, some scars would always remain, but because honesty had finally created space for genuine connection. Summer arrived with a burst of heat and color. My garden flourished, and so did my art. Teaching the beginner's workshop brought unexpected joy as I watched older adults discover or rediscover creative expression. Some were tentative at first, apologizing for amateur efforts, but I recognized the hunger in their eyes, the same longing for self-expression that had awakened in me. "Forget perfection," I told them on our first day. Seek connection with yourself, with what you see, with how you feel. The technique will come. By the third week, the atmosphere had transformed from hesitant to enthusiastic. Phyllis, a 70-year-old former accountant, discovered a talent for bold, expressionistic landscapes. Walter, a widower like myself, found solace in meticulous, still lifes of ordinary objects. His late wife's reading glasses, a well-worn baseball glove, keys on a hook. "You've created a safe space here," the program director told me after observing a class. "They trust you." Trust. It was a gift I didn't take lightly. When Claire returned from New Mexico in September, bronzed by the desert sun and brimming with new ideas, she insisted on seeing my latest work. "Dorothy Wilson," she exclaimed, examining the paintings in my sunroom studio, "you've found your voice." "Have I asked, surprised by her assessment. "Absolutely, there's a distinctive quality to your work now, this interplay of light and shadow. The way you render hands, it's unmistakably yours." Her words stayed with me as I prepared for my largest exhibition yet, a featured show at the Fairview Community Gallery in October. 20 pieces, all completed within the last year, would be displayed for 3 weeks. The gallery director had suggested a theme, visible portraits of women over 60. I had spent months on the collection, painting women in my community, Mrs. Langley in her garden, Elaine from my book club with her beloved cello, Phyllis from my art class, hands covered in vibrant paint, my sister Marge, her face lined but fierce as she trained for her 10th marathon at 68. Each portrait captured not just a likeness, but a life fully lived, a woman who refused to disappear with age. The week before the exhibition, I received an unexpected visitor. A sleek black car pulled into my driveway, and a young woman in a tailored suit emerged. She introduced herself as Vanessa Morgan, director of the Westfield Art Center in the city. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit," she said. "I saw your work in a small show last month and wanted to speak with you directly." Over tea in my kitchen, she explained that Westfield was planning a special exhibition for Women's History Month titled "Late Bloomers, Female Artists Who Began After 50. "We'd like to include your work," she said, "specifically your portraits of older women. They're remarkable, unsentimental but deeply compassionate." I nearly dropped my teacup. Westfield was no community gallery. It was a prestigious regional art center that featured established artists. I I'm flattered," I stammered, "but I'm still very new to this. Self-taught, mostly." Vanessa smiled. "That's precisely what interests us. Your work has an authenticity that formal training sometimes polishes away. You see these women, really see them." She left me with her card and a request to consider the opportunity. After she departed, I sat in my garden, overwhelmed by the possibilities opening before me. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be considering a prestigious exhibition, I would have thought them delusional. Yet here I was. I called Catherine that evening to share the news. "Mom, that's incredible," she exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. "Westfield is a big deal. Emma and I visited there on a school trip last year." "I'm not sure I'm ready for something so visible," I admitted. "Isn't that the whole point?" Catherine asked softly. "Being visible again." Her insight surprised me. "Yes," I said after a moment. "Yes, I suppose it is." "Then you have to do it," she said firmly. "And we'll all be there on opening night." The night of my community gallery opening arrived crisp and clear. I wore a deep blue dress that brought out my eyes and a silver necklace Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. Mrs. Langley insisted on driving us both, despite my protests that I could manage. "Nonsense," she said. "Artists shouldn't have to worry about parking on their big night." The gallery was already crowded when we arrived. Claire greeted me with a warm hug. "Ready to shine?" I nodded, though butterflies danced in my stomach. My eyes scanned the room, noting familiar faces, my art class students, neighbors, friends from the book club. And then, standing near the center of the gallery, Catherine, James, and the children, all dressed in their best clothes. Emma rushed over, enveloping me in a hug. "Grandma, this is so cool. Everyone's talking about your paintings." Noah, looking uncomfortable in a button-up shirt, added, "Yeah, and there's fancy cheese, too." I laughed, grateful for his grounding presence. The gallery director clinked a glass for attention and gave a brief introduction, speaking eloquently about the theme of visibility and my journey as an artist. Then she invited me to say a few words. Standing before the crowd, I felt a momentary panic. But then I looked at my paintings lining the walls, all those women who had trusted me to see them, to render their strength and vulnerability on canvas. I owed them my courage. 3 years ago, I began, I was told that the best gift I could give would be to disappear. It was a devastating moment, but also a wake-up call. I glanced at Catherine, who gave me an encouraging nod. I realized I had already been disappearing for years, making myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less visible. These paintings are my answer to that. Not just my refusal to disappear, but my celebration of women who remain vibrantly present in their sixth, seventh, eighth decades and beyond. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Each woman here, I continued, gesturing to the portraits, has taught me something about resilience, about gain, about claiming space in a world that often looks past us as we age. They've shown me that life doesn't diminish with years. It deepens, grows richer, more complex. As I spoke, I noticed a tall, elegant woman at the back of the room, Vanessa Morgan from Westfield, who caught my eye and smiled approvingly. So this exhibition isn't just about being seen by others, I concluded. It's about seeing ourselves, our worth, our beauty, our enduring right to take up space in this world. Thank you all for witnessing that with me tonight. The applause was warm and sustained. As people moved to examine the paintings more closely, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers. The evening passed in a blur of conversations, congratulations, and to my astonishment, red sold dots appearing beside several pieces. Near the end of the night, Vanessa approached me. "That was a beautiful speech, Dorothy, and I'm even more convinced that you belong in our exhibition. Have you decided?" I looked around the gallery at my work, at the people engaging with it, at the community that had formed around this act of creation and witnessing. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'd be honored to participate." Later, as the crowd thinned, Catherine found me sitting on a bench, taking a moment of quiet. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said, sitting beside me. "Thank you," I replied, realizing how long I had waited to hear those words from her. "I've been thinking about what you said about disappearing. I never really understood until tonight what I was asking you to do." She reached for my hand. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said, squeezing her fingers gently. We sat in comfortable silence, watching as James helped the gallery staff carefully wrap a sold painting for its new owner. "Life is funny, isn't it?" Catherine mused. 3 years ago, everything fell apart. But look what's grown from the rubble." I nodded, thinking of all the unexpected gifts that had emerged from that painful time. My rediscovered passion for art, new friendships, a stronger sense of self, and yes, even this slowly healing relationship with my daughter. "Do you regret any of it?" Catherine asked hesitantly. I considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain we caused each other," I said finally. "But I don't regret finding myself again. I don't think I could have done that without the breaking point." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Me neither." The next morning, I woke early and made myself a cup of tea. I carried it out to the garden, which was touched with autumn gold now, the flowers fading but still beautiful in their seasonal transition. I thought about the journey of the past 3 years, from invisibility to recognition, from self-abandonment to self-discovery. It hadn't been easy. There had been days of doubt, of loneliness, of wondering if I had made the right choices. But sitting in my garden with the morning sun warming my face, I knew with absolute certainty that I had. My phone chimed with a text from Emma Grandma. My art teacher loved the techniques you showed me. Can we paint again this weekend? I smiled and typed back, of course, sweetheart. My door is always open. And it was. Open to new possibilities. Open to deeper connections. Open to the full, rich life I was still creating, day by day. That evening, I added a final entry to the journal I had begun 3 years ago when Catherine told me to disappear. She didn't realize she was actually calling me to appear, fully, authentically, unapologetically. The journey from invisibility to visibility hasn't been straight or easy. There have been detours, setbacks, moments of doubt, but each step has led me here, to this place of peace and purpose. I am Dorothy Wilson, artist, teacher, mother, grandmother, friend. I take up space in this world without apology. I am seen, and more importantly, I see myself clearly now. I haven't disappeared. I've emerged. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And if you enjoyed my journey, don't miss two other stories that are channel favorites. My son-in-law mocked my small inheritance until he learned what it really was. And after 40 years of marriage, I discovered my husband's secret life.